To ruin a country, Nigeria is a clear example. Just one company is needed, Shell. The company promised to develop the country, create jobs and income, improving the lives of the people. However, the result was the opposite. The company dominated the government and the armed forces. It polluted waters and arable lands, poisoning the population. This destroyed the livelihoods of numerous families. When some tried to resist, they faced a bleak fate. 80 Nigerians were killed, and 600 houses were set ablaze. Repression was relentless and ongoing. This is the sad reality of how Shell deceived and devastated Nigeria. Shell's expansion in Nigeria. During World War I, Shell stood out as the main supplier of fuel to the British Army, including the exclusive supply of aviation fuel. After the war, it quickly established itself as the largest global oil corporation. However, Shell aimed to grow even further. Normally, large companies increase their revenues by expanding production. However, for oil giants, it is not possible to simply create more oil, as it is a limited natural resource. Therefore, they seek new reserves. The challenge lies in the fact that many countries holding these reserves are reluctant to allow exploration by foreign companies. The solution found is to target nations with vast oil reserves but economically weakened, unable to exploit these resources on their own. In addition to poverty, a corrupt environment makes negotiations more accessible. It was in this context that Shell fixed its interest in Nigeria. In 1958, the company began operations in this African country, promising significant foreign investments, job creation, income, and development. However, in a short time, this collaboration degenerated into a nightmare for Nigerians. The emergence of complex challenges. Initially, Shell's presence in Nigeria promised significant benefits. Being a country of extreme poverty, the arrival of a large corporation with promises of investments and infrastructural improvements sounded like a valuable opportunity. However, this relationship proved costly, mainly due to the economic dependence created. About 90% of Nigeria's exports are oil, representing almost 40% of its economy. Approximately 65% of government revenue comes from Shell's oil activities, putting national sovereignty at stake. The situation became even more delicate considering the consequences of a possible Nigerian attempt to regain control of its oil reserves. If this happened, Shell could cease extraction, triggering a deep economic crisis in the country. Moreover, Shell controls not only extraction but also the distribution network. Even if Nigeria took over the extraction process, it would still need Shell to export the oil. Faced with this dependence, the Nigerian government found itself in a complicated position. Any resistance to Shell's domination could disrupt the economy and incite civil unrest. The question then arises, why didn't the authorities avoid this situation? The answer lies in the country's endemic corruption. Shell, through substantial bribes, managed to manipulate the Nigerian government, turning it into a kind of puppet. A recent anti-corruption investigation revealed that Shell transferred $1.3 billion to Nigeria, supposedly for public policies. However, these funds ended up in the hands of high government officials, and Shell was aware of it. Consequently, without resistance, Shell gained access to the OPL 245 oil field, increasing its reserves by 30%. Although the investigation is still ongoing, it is clear that, while the corrupt government benefited, the Nigerian population remained on the sidelines of this prosperity. Environmental tragedy in Nigeria. In 1995, Shell entered into an agreement with the Nigerian government, promising investments, jobs, and improvements in the lives of civilians. However, the reality was the opposite. The lives of Nigerians deteriorated drastically. The cause? Oil, which should have been a source of wealth. Since 2010, approximately 3,000 oil spills have occurred in Nigeria, totaling about 29 million liters. The result? Contamination of the country's main source of drinking water. The water, now unfit for consumption, devastated local fishing and agriculture. Instead of prosperity, Shell brought more poverty, increasing people's dependence on the company's aid. Shell never fully took responsibility for the spills. They blamed theft and sabotage for the environmental disaster. Among the 29 million liters spilled, the company acknowledged responsibility for only 151,000 liters. That is less than 1% of the total. With the government under its control, thorough investigations were unlikely. Shell also bribed NGOs to ignore the problem and promote the company's image. The population, exhausted from exploitation and environmental damage, began to revolt. They felt colonized not by a country but by a corporation. Nigerians protested, demanding the exit of Shell and an end to the exploitation of their resources. The demonstrations intensified, and Shell responded with force. Using its influence in the government and the armed forces, Shell suppressed the protests violently. The Nigerian army, bribed by the company, did not hesitate to act against its own people. They used firearms and grenades against the protesters. The result was tragic: 80 deaths and nearly 600 houses destroyed. Allegations of rape, looting, and torture by the army also surfaced, but the population did not remain silent. In this context of resistance and injustice, a central figure emerges: Ken Saro-Wiwa. He became a symbol of the fight against Shell's oppression and environmental destruction. His entry into history marks a new chapter in Nigerian resistance, a moment of hope amidst this chaos. Ogoniland and Shell, an unequal struggle. Ogoniland, located in the Niger Delta, is home to approximately 832,000 inhabitants, mostly fishermen. Its rivers, essential for local survival, were severely damaged by pollution. With Shell's arrival in 1958, Ogoniland became one of the most contaminated places in the world. The waters consumed by the Ogoni people contained levels of carcinogenic benzene 900 times above the acceptable limit. Nevertheless, the region generated over $30 billion for Shell. Ken Saro-Wiwa, a Nigerian writer and environmental activist, founded a movement to protect Ogoniland. The goal was to prevent the destruction of the ecosystem by Shell through peaceful protests. This movement began to strengthen, worrying Shell, which feared losing its oil exploration privileges. To pressure the company, the movement sabotaged its infrastructure and intimidated its employees. These actions forced Shell to pause its operations in Ogoniland. Enraged, the company executives and the Nigerian government sought solutions. On May 21, 1994, 4 Ogoni leaders were murdered by youths. This tragedy was the perfect opportunity to incriminate Ken Saro-Wiwa and 8 other leaders of the movement. They were accused of inciting the murder, despite Saro-Wiwa not being in Ogoniland on that day. The trial faced international criticism and was deemed unfair. Despite global protests, the 9 were found guilty and remained imprisoned. Finally, on October 31, 1995, they were sentenced to death by hanging. Today, they are remembered as the Ogoni 9.
Perseverance in environmental justice. The widows of the Ogoni 9 persist tirelessly in their quest for justice. Despite obstacles in Nigeria, where the government supported Shell, they have not given up. They took their demands to international courts. Some testimonies revealed bribes for false accusations against Ken Saro and his allies. However, no verdict has been pronounced against the company. In 2009, Shell paid compensation of $15,500,000